the call, but I'll go ahead and have Katie do the ground rules for how to communicate. We hope you're doing a lot of communicating today. So.
Yes, this is especially important today. So there are two ways to communicate with the group. You can write a comment in it's called the question box on your screen, and that question will pop up for the group, and we will read it and share it with the group as well. So that's a way to comment or answer any questions or provide feedback at any point. Use that function. And then if you'd like to participate verbally, and we really hope that you do, you just raise your hand, a little hand raise function button, and then we can unmute you, and then you can contribute verbally.
All right, great. And big agenda today. We're going to welcome some new states. We have a data reporting example from Louisiana that we're excited to share with you. We're hoping to hear from you on what you are wrestling with. And we had sent a note about that before, so maybe we've had a chance to think about it. We did get some responses already. And then we'll be taking a look at a straw man of common reporting standards and giving you an opportunity to provide feedback. So let's jump in, and Katie, maybe you can give us the status of our membership on the state side.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think we are at right around 30 states now. And so we had a webinar, which many of you were on Friday with CCSSO and the deputy finance folks from various states. And after that webinar, we got a lot more interest in the BitWig. So we have 5 more states joining us today. I believe we have a representative from each state on the call right now. We have Louisiana, Montana, Utah, Vermont, and West Virginia joining the group for the first time today. So welcome to you all.
Great. And for those of you who are new, we also have LEAs that have joined the group. Some are from some of these member states, and it's terrific to have our LEA partners on the call because they bring that LEA perspective when we're looking at data, financial transparency data, and trying to make decisions about it. And that way they can kind of look at it at where the rubber meets the road at the district level. So while we have a lot of states present, we also have, I think, somewhere in the neighborhood of 17 LEAs that are regularly joining, and we're appreciative of them. So what we wanted to do, kind of just to get us going, while we do have some new participants today, we didn't really want to take much time to go over the ground already covered. But what we do often like to do is take a look at some financial transparency examples from our member states. And some of these are in transition, some are in where data have been pulled out to try to create a first draft of a spending scenario by the school level. But since Louisiana is new to joining, and since Louisiana has been at the school finance transparency game for some number of years and has a set of reports on their website for every school in the state that does clarify expenditures, we thought we might use that as today's example. So what we've done here is pulled out of some screenshots of these, and there's a little bit more on the next page. But what I thought what might be useful is to just take a really quick look. This is a school, and I think I cut the school name off, but you can see that there is a kind of a grid where you can see instruction, pupil support, etc. on the left, and then salaries, benefits, and other expenditures going across toward the right, with a total and then a central office overhead computed after that. I think conceivably you could get a sum by summing the two. Also available on this is a static report, but available on the static report is the average for the LEA and the average for the state off to the right. So you can see this particular school is really pretty much right at well, let's see, spending about 10,000 in current expenditures per pupil, plus another about 1,000 in central office to get a number that looks a little bit, actually pretty close to the state average here. So that's how this one looks. And on the same report, and I thought this was useful because we have been talking about having enrollment. Enrollment counts are there. You can see that they're, pre-K and kindergarten are broken out separately. Not enrollment counts by type, but enrollment counts by grade. And then what also is interesting and noteworthy is that the FTEs are listed. And we've talked a little bit about that. While it's not common in financial reports, a lot of people seem to want to know information about FTEs. So how many staff do they have? And that's down there as well. And I'm going to jump to the next page really quickly. Is that you could see that the reports include average salaries for the school, the LEA, and the state, and then some other data on the characteristics of the staff. So those are some of the other things people have listed. But I just wanted to put that up there. And Katie, I don't know if you want to add anything, or if anyone from Louisiana wants to share how people have used the data. But we wanted to give that one a chance to be in front of the group.
Yeah, I don't think I have anything to add. I think that was a great description. And I don't see that Beth is on from Louisiana right now. I know she said she was in session today. But if anybody else from Louisiana is on the call, if you're on Beth's team and you're here, you can raise your hand and feel free to weigh in if you'd like.
So from what we could tell, it looked like the legislature had actually passed some sort of law maybe 10 years ago or so that required that the SEA post this information. And so it's been on the website for some number of years, and you can actually go back several years. What we had the urge to do is kind of dig around and do comparisons, start saying like, well, where are schools spending the most or the least, or in a particular, how can we line it up with the outcomes data, and how can we graph it and things like that to sort of figure out what the trends are. What does it look like over time? And but the reports, as far as we could tell, are all static reports, and there may be a way to pull the whole data file out and start building some of those more interactive opportunities. But I was curious, and maybe we'll have to ask Louisiana next time, how if at all, school and district people have used the data, or community people have used the data. It's really pretty clearly laid out as far as I could tell, and I was just wondering, what people thought of it. But I don't have any insights on that. We only had this limited experience, and as I mentioned, Louisiana is a new member. So, any other thoughts or comments? Okay, so I think this is relatively, increasingly common, where you'll have a sort of report like this. What maybe the tricky next step is getting visualizations and making them interactive so that people can start doing comparisons versus just find out the numbers for their own school, and potentially lining it up with outcomes. So we can look at a school and say, wow, they're hitting the mean for this, that, and the other spending, or they're above the mean for that, above the state average for their spending. But unless we have that context that we were trying to figure out last couple of meetings of how's the school doing, it's hard to digest financial information alone. But anyway, that's just our warm up. We thought we would go try to invite you all to join the conversation a little bit and ask what you are wrestling with regarding to meeting the financial transparency requirement. And you can respond verbally, as Katie mentioned, by raising your hand, or with the chat box if you like. And Katie, maybe you can go ahead and let people know what you've heard already.
Sure. We had Donna weigh in earlier via email. And Donna, it looks like you're on the call, but I don't know if you can have audio. But Donna sent an email and mentioned that they are looking at kind of finalizing the details of their plan, and are somewhat worried about releasing a plan that's not complete. And so she said that the struggle that they've had is that they want to make sure that everything that should be included or excluded is in the official guidance to districts. And so they're really thinking through what those inclusions and exclusions are going to be, because they don't want to send out any sort of communication to districts without finalizing that. Going back and talking to districts afterwards would be maybe not the best communication strategy from the SEA level. That's what Donna is thinking about.
And that makes sense, right? Like that, whatever instructions you give to districts, you want them to be as final as possible. And if it looks like there's a whole lot of things you didn't think about, it's just going to be sort of botched. There'll probably be something, but the less the better. Any other comments or questions? Here's our meme for the day. This is when those of us on the webinar side stare at the computer hoping someone responds to our question.
Robert O'Donnell has a question. I'll go ahead and unmute you now.
Yeah, so I'll just chime in. What we're this is Rob O'Donnell from Massachusetts. What we're wrestling with is helping districts think through how to communicate about the data once we release it. You know, we've got a school level expenditure report in our data warehouse that only districts can access, but we never released the data to the wide world before. So we feel like this is going to raise a lot of questions that districts are going to have to answer locally. So we're just trying to think through, you know, communication strategies for districts to be able to deal with that. We're trying to give them as much context in the report that we're developing to help hopefully answer some of those questions around, you know, what kinds of students are being served in each school, what the staffing levels are and whatnot, similar to what you just showed. But still, we feel like there's going to be a lot of questions that folks locally are going to ask about why spending is different in some schools compared to others within the same district. So particularly with our largest districts, you know, we're talking with Boston. They have a weighted student funding formula that they use to allocate funding to their schools. And, you know, when this report gets out there, certainly one of the first things folks might do is look at the weighted student funding amounts for the schools and compare it to the actual spending amounts in the schools. So we're anticipating that could raise some issues as well. So I don't know if you have any thoughts about that.
Yeah, this is great, and I think really, I mean, in some ways, a second stage issue, you know, because Massachusetts is further ahead on assembling its data than some states, and you're absolutely right. The next step is how do we sort of look ahead to notice what the public's going to notice, and how do we get ready to talk about that. And we did have, and maybe we should do this again. We did have called together some findings that could be useful to pass on to districts about how to communicate, you know, sort of what to say, like, well, we spend the money on this, and then, you know, end the phrase with, because we are trying to do the most for students. Like, you always kind of have to relate money to student outcomes each time you talk about it. And there might be some very generic statements, you know, how come my school doesn't get as much money as the one down the street? Well, as a district, you know, we're trying to deploy our funds in ways that get the greatest outcome possible for the entire population. And then you say the answer, but you respond every time first with that connection to students. And some of that level of instruction might be useful. Although I imagine in Boston, there's the separate set because of the way the student formula kind of match up with the actual spending. District will have to think about.
Yeah, so that, you know, not looking for answers today, obviously, but that's sort of what we're anticipating.
Yeah, great. And a really smart thing to be thinking about. I think we might have someone from DQC on, and I know that they've spent a lot of time thinking about that too. So at a certain point, we may want to make that kind of a more purposeful topic agenda for the group.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, thank you. Anyone else, or with things you're thinking about? We got a little insight from Rhode Island and Massachusetts, and I know some of you are sort of still working on this from the front end.
I know that we've had a little bit of trouble with folks logging in today. Sorry about that. But so if you missed it, we are talking about kind of what are you struggling with. So if your state has just joined and you want to contribute, what are you struggling with when it comes to meeting this requirement? And you can type your answer in the question box, or you can also raise your hand and get unmuted and we will call on you.
And for now, I'll assume that there are no struggles and everybody's really excited about this, which I know isn't necessarily the case. Katie took a look at some of the state plans that were submitted for ESSA and might have some insights to share about what she saw. But in the meantime, go ahead, Laura.
Looks like IPS, so Latonya has a question. I'll go ahead and unmute you, Latonya, sorry. I think you
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah, yeah.
Just wanted to ask the question. I was curious around, I think we're doing I'm in Indianapolis, Indiana at IPS, and I think we're doing a pretty good job of trying to narrow in on sort of what we want from a transparency perspective and how we calculate it. What I was curious about was how the Louisiana LEA was able to connect with the state so that the state was able to provide them with similarly calculated averages. So I see those comparisons and I'm just curious, our state is still kind of working through how they are going to measure some of these things. And so did they get on the same page, several years ago, or is this sort of their attempt to take the state data and average it to compare to their own data?
I don't know, Katie, do you have any background information on that?
I don't, but we can look into it.
Yeah, I think so. What we are seeing in states that are able to produce reports like that is there's a little more work done in advance about having some sort of common financial chart of accounts and potentially a common tool for even recording the data so that it all gets entered into the same sort of system at the district level. And but we looked through the reports in Louisiana and found that the numbers are reported even for the different charters. So there's been some sort of work done in Louisiana on that data collection side, because it's not really apples to oranges as you pull it together. It's pretty consistently reported. So I think that may be that the state has an infrastructure in place to both a common chart of accounts and a collection mechanism that may not yet be in place in Indiana.
That makes sense. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Yeah, sure. So hopefully we'll hear more. I'm sorry that I didn't quite realize that Louisiana wasn't going to be on the phone. Any other questions or comments? But that's another common theme that we're hearing is just like, what is the mechanism for getting the data from the district to the state? Because the requirement is actually for the state. Katie, I thought maybe you could tell us what you saw in the plans that a few states had looked for, had looked in their plans to ask for an extension from the Department of Ed. And we don't know for sure how the Department of Ed will answer that. It's not in the law that they can grant extensions, but I don't know if there's still a way to do that. Do you want to comment on that?
Sure. Yeah, there were two states that requested extensions. I think Illinois and Vermont were the two in the plan specifically. And so I did pose that question to our contact at the Department of Ed, and we'll let you all know if or when we hear back about that. But yeah, as Marguerite said, as far as we know, the extension is not currently on the table because that was in regulation and that is no longer applicable. We've also got a couple of emails the past few weeks asking about regulations and guidance. So just wanted to reiterate that because of the continuing resolution that was passed a couple months ago, the guidance and the regulations that were under the Obama administration no longer stand. So as you're making your plans to meet this requirement, you don't have to work off of those particular documents. Other things that I saw in the ESSA plans, a good number of states did actually mention the requirement, whether it was when talking about ensuring adequate resource allocation to various districts, or when talking about making sure things were equitable among districts and among schools within districts. So we were excited to see that it got brought up in so many plans, especially when it wasn't necessarily a part that was built into the abbreviated plan.
Yeah, and to clarify the timeline that is in the law, it says that states will report spending by school for the 2017-18 school year by December 2018. So that means that for this next school year that starts this fall, some sort of plan needs to be in place in order to make sure that those expenditures can be captured and reported. Anything else on your mind? I don't see a lot in the question box today, but I'll assume that's because you are all have all your comments and thoughts addressed here. Well, I will move forward since we could stare at the computer a little bit longer, but I'll move forward to our next item on the agenda, which is again to talk a little bit more about this common reporting standards. And this is just a quick background slide for those of you who might be new to this conversation. You know, why are we talking about common reporting standards across states? Nothing in the law says that there needs to be consistency across states and how these things get reported, but you all have asked for that, and you asked that because the goal was would be nice to be able to compare school spending across schools in different states, and this came out of a conversation we all had at one point where we were talking about, you know, if you're a rural school, maybe with a lot of bilingual ed students, and you want to look across rural schools of your dimensions and your student demographics across different states to figure out how spending and outcomes compare. Are there things to learn from those and so on? Well, then you wanted to be able to draw boundaries larger than your own state. And so that was it's something that came out of this group. And we've talked about it a little bit, but thought even if a state chooses not to opt into the common reporting standards, perhaps this thinking of getting to a set of commonalities will help everybody sort of make choices about what they want to report. So we know that the states have different systems, and last time there was some collection of information about what would be possible to report, and there are going to be big inconsistencies. But we've also talked together about having some kind of baseline information such that more detail could be could build on as states go. So like we had some baseline information about expenditures and student counts and things, but later you could add on outcomes and expenditures by object or function or other categories to make for richer comparisons. So today we're talking mostly about this baseline info. And we do have some information from you all on what's feasible. And I know that the truth is everybody is all over the place and still working on this. But that the last point being that common reporting standards would not prevent an SEA from adding more specific standards or requirements for their particular state. And some states are just going to say, we have a more specific way that we expect you to account for your information. And the larger common reporting framework may not be that specific. And that's, I think, because the idea is to go with what people can make in common. So that's just that's a little bit of background. But what we thought we would do today is come up, we have 3 different categories of strawman ideas. One is around the definition of student. And since the transparency requirement says you have to report spending per pupil, we need to have some agreement about what a pupil is. And so we started putting some strawman ideas here. And I wonder, as we read each one of these, if you might use the question box to type your responses, and your responses might go something like the green box on the right. You know, A, you could even just put A, that means you like it. You don't have to type the whole thing. Or I'm worried about that one because, or my state would have trouble meeting that standard, at least at first. Or what about something as a replacement? And so I'll jump in with these. These are kind of the warm-up ones because they're student definition. We're not even into the finances yet. But number 1, the per pupil calculations rely on a pupil count where each student is counted as 1. And that may seem to be really obvious, but some LEAs and SEAs weight their actual students, meaning that, you know, a low-income student might count as 1.5 or something, and they might otherwise use the sum of the weighted students in the denominator. So this is simply meant to say that one student, you know, each student counts as one. And I'm going to go through all three of these, and feel free to type in the question box if you have concerns, or you would be fine with these. Number 2, each SEA would publicly define a uniform procedure for how their state defines student counts. The state could say we're doing ADA. The state could say we're doing a one-time count on October 20th. The state could say, you know, we're doing a 4-time count or something like that. But that would be defined for each state, and we wouldn't require that it be common. And third, SEAs would include in their reports the enrollment by school. So we wouldn't just see the finances, we would actually get to see the enrollment. You'd have a sense of if it was a big school or a small school. And where possible, it's a little gray area, enrollment by student type. And that one still says where possible, because a lot of states don't have it. So I'll stop there for a moment. Great, we're getting mostly some positive feedback on these, that this seems like it's rational. And it's true, Cynthia, I think you're right. Cynthia's sort of worried that, Cindy's worried that if every state defines it differently, you really aren't necessarily going to have comparability. And we've thought about this, but also thought that there's so much involved in the counting of students that we're worried that it's such a big infrastructure item to, you know, the count of students. Sometimes in some states, it's already written into state law as to how you count students, that it has to be done at a 1-time count or a 3-time count or a quarterly count or an ADA. And if those are so ingrained in different ways, we were worried that requiring uniformity might just be insurmountable. You're 100% right, though. If one state uses a 1-time count and the other state uses ADA, you're dividing by a different number. And I don't know exactly what to say about that. We've looked at the differences between them, and sometimes the numbers can vary by, you know, 5 or 10%. So those are big issues. I think the only thing I can say is, you know, it'd be great if the state reports it, but I wonder if others are also worried about number 2.
Marguerite, it doesn't look like from a comment perspective that we're getting anybody worried about number 2, but we did have one worry about suppression for number 3. And a lot of folks are asking, what do you mean by student type? I responded in the question box, but in case you didn't see it, it means like English language learner, at-risk students, special education students, pre-K, those sorts of subgroups of students, CTE, things like that.
Okay, and let's see, what's the comment around suppression? I'm not sure I quite understand it.
This one came from Alina, and it says suppression may be an issue for smaller schools. Maybe it means like enrollment may be too low for some schools.
And do you want to chime in, Alina? You're unmuted if you want to just explain what you're worried about.
She does not have a microphone.
Sorry about that. Sometimes there's not a microphone on your end, and feel free to type it in the type box. But this is a great way for us to kind of collect some information on what you're all thinking, potentially refine these as we all go, and put them out, you know, for you as we can.
So there's another question or concern here on 3, because some of the student populations are so small they can't be separately identified due to FERPA. So,
oh yes, that may be it. Okay, so you could say if the school only has 60 kids and there's 3 kids who are special ed, you can't report the counts. Is that right? You can't, I know you can't report the test scores, but maybe you can't report the counts.
Yeah, I think it's like an identification issue. I don't know that you could if you could identify the student by the count.
That is a very good point. And if they are low, I'm guessing you could either not include it or put a star saying this field is too small that we're not identifying the number. And I think if it's really small, it's not a huge issue. I think what we're trying to do is be able to identify the difference between a school with 95% poverty and a school with 20% poverty or things like that. So that's where the data can be really richly compared. Not that we're trying to figure out, do you have 3 poor kids or 2? You know, not like that.
Yeah, and Cindy chimed in and said that they use an in size of 10. So it would show expenditures for that size, but not include student count for that school in the particular program if the in size is too small.
Okay, that makes really good sense. And then Utah's also concerned about n size. Yeah, this is a good one. I hadn't thought about that, and we should think about how we can include that. In any other thoughts or concerns? You know, Katie had brought up as we were kind of going through the Strawman things, what counts as a student? Is preschool a student? And we don't have an answer to that, but thought I'd put that out to the group. Are we only talking about K through 12, or are we considering preschoolers as well? Or you know how sometimes there are kids that are kids with disabilities and they're outside of the K through 12 age, but they do receive services. So I don't know if any of you are further along this have thought about that. I mean, one option is to do what Louisiana did and list the kids that are pre-K. So if you're going to include them, they're listed, and as are the pre-K expenditures included. So we'll have to do a little more thinking on that one. Okay, so that was productive. Thank you all. This one is trickier. Maybe we should take these at a batch at a time because there's a lot of them. So now we're jumping into the expenditures issue. So why don't we look at maybe number 1 and number 2, that the spending figure reported for each school will include all public funds, both school and any central share, with the exception of agreed upon exclusions. So adult ed tuition, we'll get into exclusions later, but that there would be some sort of, you know, it would not be possible for a district to take a chunk of money and not show it at all. So that's the first one. And then the second one would be, at a minimum, the real salaries of a school's core staff would be attributed to the school level. So, you know, there's plenty of things that can go in the central budget, or that just could be averaged across or whatever. But at a minimum, and this is, I think, essentially in the law, the real salaries of a school's core staff would be attributed. And maybe I'll stop there for a second and see whether you're comfortable with 1 and 2. And it might take some work. It looks like in Indianapolis, Elena's suggesting it may take some work, and I think that's true in probably other places. I'll add on number 3 here, and 3 and 4 kind of go together. Central expenditures can be attributed to schools via formula. That's fine, and we saw that in many of our examples. The formula can be for student, for staff, some sort of mixture, or via some sort of state and local discretion. And Rhode Island's a place where there's a very specific policy for how central expenditures are attributed to schools. And I think what we're saying here is that the standards would not specify the attribution, because at least at this moment, it may not be feasible across states. That each state could choose a way, or the state could leave it open. But the bigger idea from number 1 is that all the money had to be captured in some way. And then number 4, where feasible, any central LEA expenditures would be listed separately, you know, itemized out. So that a school might say, you know, I don't think we get anything from that. Okay, I can see it's not money that's physically at my school, it's somewhere else. But that's just this idea that we've been using for a while that shows school level and central level separately.
So we're getting some comments, Marguerite, don't want to back you up too much, about number 2, core
Sure.
staff. Did you have an idea of what that meant, or can you define that for the group?
So, you know, as we've been talking about these straw men, one of the difficulties was that the more specific we get, the fewer states could ever sort of join in, because core staff mean different things in different places. And I think people would have a sense of when core staff have been left out. If all the schools, you know, classroom teachers or something aren't in there, that would be unacceptable. But at the same time, you know, is the reading coach a core staff? You know, I think that the idea is that those decisions would be made by states, but that if you have physical staff working, you know, at full time at a school, that they have to be captured, or, you know, at least most of them have to be captured in there. And I think the idea here is, you know, these are minimum reporting standards. So if you don't capture the staff at the school, then that money is going to be in the central, and it's going to show up in the central. It just may mask some of the spending differences across schools. And that's a risk. But over time, I guess the idea would be that the individual schools would start hashing it out with their district, saying, how come you're spending so much money and we don't have it? And they would say, you know, some of that is your money, and then let's show it. So I don't have a great answer for that, but would love your thoughts on it as well.
We also have a note from Cindy about the need for consistency or comparability at reporting central versus school. So I don't know if Cindy, if you wanna, we can unmute you and you can speak to that in some more detail. Actually, I see that you do not have a microphone right now. Okay, so I think that's a valid concern as well. You know, if one state's doing it one way and another state's doing it another way, then central at one state might not look the same as central at another state. But I think that's why we emphasize that total is so important, combining the school level and the central level if your state does end up breaking it out in that way, because totals could be compared if the same expenditures are captured in the numerator.
Yeah, and I think, you know, I think there's going to be some tension, and I'd love to get kind of the pulse for folks of whether or not we want more uniformity and everybody's got to have the same things counted as central and at school level, or less uniformity. As we've looked over data along the way, you might remember that there are some, you know, charter schools that all the money is at the school, and they wouldn't call anything the central share, at least under their current reporting scheme. And whether something lands in the central share or the school share, as long as it gets added together for a total, in some way it gives you the best sense maybe right now of what the total spending is. But since schooling services are delivered differently in different places, then it's a little bit tricky if we say now we have to go back and sort of impose on people who may not do this, or states that may not do this, this is what is considered central. And it might be a function that's very integrated with the school level. So I think that's a question. I think I see that Natalie's asking that about what is central. No, we haven't defined it. And we'll talk about capital expenditures and some of those things later. But, you know, there are school districts that put transportation in the school budgets, and there are some that many that put transportation in the central budget. And I think that we can sort of insulate against too much variation by saying wherever it is, it gets added in for a total.
So I don't want to go too far before backing up and answering Robert Wolf's question about the definition of public funds back on comment 1, because he's saying what is the definition of public funds? Because private funds become public once they're received.
Yeah, that's a good point. Well, the law talks about funds from public sources, meaning taxes, local taxes, state sources, or federal sources, so that if a school district had an auction, raised $100,000, and then gave it to the district, that those are non-public funds. Just in the same way that many school districts have private money raised, but it doesn't actually flow through the state coffers, through the district coffers. So it's a tricky area. I don't think there's anything that keeps, and this might be a big theme of today, that keeps the state from adding on to the minimum. So if your state has, it's a big issue for you to where private money are listed, then you can create another line at the bottom that says revenues from private sources, and include those.
And just quickly to summarize, I realize that not everyone can see when other folks answer questions, so you probably don't have a great pulse on how your peers are responding. So for questions 1 through 4, the answers we have received so far are majority A's, with some of the comments and questions that we have brought up over this conversation. So I will capture all this for you and upload that data as well when we do upload the webinar and the slides, so you can kind of see how folks responded.
Yeah, and I think we also got a comment that in West Virginia for number 4, that the districts may not be consistent with their coding of school and central. And I would say that at least for our common set of reporting, I don't know if it matters. Like if you're West Virginia, you could say your money has to be somewhere. If you want to distinguish between central and school, go ahead. And we think that's a good idea. If you're a charter school or an individual one school district, you can put it all in school level, and we'll see the absence of central money there, and we'll know that all of it is captured at the school level. But I think there will be places that really want to distinguish between some central and some school level as a way to help communicate with their communities, so that their own principals don't say, wait, where's half of the money that was attributed to me? Or so that they can they can choose to list transportation separately, list food services, list plenty of other central items separately, and that way it kind of gives them some cover for where's this supposedly hidden money, and when it doesn't feel like our school got it. And that I think it's a way to, it's just a common distinction that many people have wanted to use. That's why it says where feasible. So if you think it's really too weak, let us know. All right, let's look at 5 and 6. Number 5, SEAs and LEAs are welcome to create separate line items for expenditure type. So if you want to go beyond saying school level and LEA level, and you want to itemize in the LEA level, I want to itemize food service, I want to itemize special ed, and so on, that is fine. It doesn't mean that you have to only show it in this particular way. And I think we'll see a lot of this. We have contemplated saying, should we say everybody has to? But that's the other side, is that not everybody can. So, richer data is always better or more useful with the minimums that we have here. So I don't know if that one feels right for folks. And then number 6, for an LEA, all the public funds would be accounted for in the school by school totals. So whether it was in the central money or the school level, it's in the total somewhere, with the exception of any agreed upon exclusions. And that means you can still itemize things out. If you think, food service is a big problem in your district and confuses things, you could list that separately if you like. But unless it's one of our exclusions, then we think, the idea behind this one anyway is that the money would be accounted for. And there's more concerns coming up on this, so we'll talk about the exclusions in a second, but I think these ones may be trickier for folks. So if you have any thoughts on 5 and 6, great. It sounds like some of these would be easier for you.
We have 2 states that have weighed in that say they like it for 5 and 6.
Well, oops, didn't mean to go forward yet. Let's talk about those exclusions, because I think this is really an area where we haven't done enough thought, but would like your ideas. What exclusions make sense? They would need to be listed separately. Actually, let's not talk about exclusions just yet, because I want to talk about the definition of a school. So the exclusions will be listed separately. You know, adult ed, the district spends this much money on adult ed. It's not in the totals above. But let's get back to the list of exclusions in a moment and talk about the definition of a school. Believe it or not, we have to do this, and a lot of you have pointed this out over time, that without a definition of the school, this is like easy to do for lots of schools and very hard to do for some students. So first of all, the first one, and this has come up on our calls, expenditures would be reported on behalf of the school that serves the students. Meaning if, and this happens a lot, if one school receives money and students from another district, that school that's actually serving the students reports the spending on behalf of all the students who are served. And this is when you have these kind of, there are districts, I think in Vermont or Maine, where they don't serve any students. They get money, they send it off to the neighboring district, and they serve the students. Yeah, West Virginia was another one that I think had seen some of these things. So that's the definition of a school. The second one here is one we kind of have posed as a question. What about students not counted at any school? Some are, you know, maybe homeschool, part-time students, maybe they're virtual students, and maybe not assigned to any school. Does it make sense to assign those students and their costs to the LEA in a category called students not included in any school? So I didn't know if this is an almost like a separate school, like being a catch-all, or if this problem, we're making this up and this doesn't happen. And maybe some of the states that are further along and thinking about their finances can tell us how they've dealt with that.
Cindy just mentioned that the school that is sending the student is reporting the tuition that they are paying as an expense on their book. So it looks like that might be like a tuition kind of transfer.
Yeah. So one possibility would be to exclude tuition payments, right? Because it's an expense, but you can't really assign that expense to any school in your own district. So I guess in that scenario, it's currently an expense for them, but we could take it off and put it in the excluded category. Okay, and we're not seeing a whole lot of people who actually are worried about number 2, maybe because it's not really happening.
Yeah, it looks like so far we have agreement on 1 for those who have weighed in, and then mostly for number 2 as well.
All right, and 2 could be kind of a placeholder where we worry about that when it comes up, and maybe there's always an asterisk about that. Well, let's talk about the exclusions. And this is probably another area as we kind of close out the hour where we'll need to do more work. We know that for sure. There's a lot of room here for the group to kind of decide what gets excluded. And I didn't put it on this list, but food services is one that has been also raised as a possible exclusion, because food services is messy with students paying fees for lunch, and then that money being commingled with other money. And one way to sort of deal with all of that is to just take it off the table. And I don't know if folks are comfortable with these exclusions, if they want more exclusions. I don't think exclusions are a bad idea. I just want to make sure that the districts can actually exclude them, so that we don't see some states where they're like, well, that's an exclusion, but I have no way to exclude it. So let me know what you think.
So we do have a hand raised from Latonia from IPS. I'm going to go ahead and unmute you. I'm not sure if this is a new hand raise or an old one, so I apologize. Trying to scroll through too many systems here. Not quite sure if you can hear us or if you are off mute, if you could share.
No, I'm here.
Great.
Thanks. Just a couple of things. On the previous slide, there was one comment. I mean, we serve a significant number of non-public students in special ed. And so I find it interesting, they're not counted in our LEA, but the expenditures obviously are supporting students, and those students are in private institutions and they're not supported by vouchers. So that may be a situation that doesn't exist in other markets, but it's something that we do have a significant amount of expenditures related to non-public students who are not in our LEA, but those expenditures are mandated. So I don't know how everybody else is handling it, but if someone's got a thought around that, that'd be helpful. And then the second question I had was, we have, a significant number of students who are in innovation schools, which may or may not be, they may be innovation charter schools where they're outside of our LEA. We have innovation schools that are inside of our LEA. And then we have innovation schools who are counted in our LEA, but they're also reported independently because those schools were already in existence before the innovation agreement. So we're going to have some interesting things in terms of how to talk about expenditures for those schools, because in some instances, those dollars are passing through us and we're distributing those dollars. And in other instances, they're receiving their dollars directly from the state. And we kind of got, some schools got grandfathered in that they continue to receive their funds directly. And then schools, ever since that grandfathering, their monies are passing through us. So, and the agreements are all different. So all of the agreements do not necessarily align with the per pupil funding that you would look at the state and say, this much is coming because of the student. Some of this is coming for complexity. Some of this is coming from poverty. So just interesting. I just want to throw that out, that we have a very unique structure of schools that may require us to have a much more granular approach to cost per student, not just for our LEA, but for our categories of schools.
Yeah, I think,
and I don't know if anybody else has that experience, but it might be something to talk about.
There are others that have that experience. And so, like, I'm just brainstorming a little just because it is a very common one. I guess if the money passes through and goes to a school that gets recorded separately, then you would exclude it as part of a pass-through. Like if it goes to an innovation school and the other innovation school is reported as a school with their expenditures somewhere else, then you can report it as pass-through. If your LEA is actually recording, the full expenditures for any of those schools, then you keep it and you include all the data. But that'll be tricky for a lot of places. I think Milwaukee has some like in-district charters, out-of-district charters, and some other ones are similarly where they're two districts are co-running a school. So somebody's going to have to decide who's reporting the expenditures on the school, and if money is coming from an LEA to do that, they can be considered a pass-through. But that, you're right. I think you almost are going to have to handle those one-off each one. On the first question, I wonder if we can handle the special ed funds that are in private placements as an exclusion. I wonder if people want to do that or not. We could add it to the list of exclusion, or if or special ed students, that are served privately, but we're covering those costs. And if because we're not counting the students in our student count for any school. So the expenditures shouldn't be there if they're not counted for the students. I mean, it's sort of a weird thing to load on, unless you want to sort of say, this is the kind of aggregate special ed expenditure and I'm just dividing it among all the kids. But that's a possibility for an exclusion, and feel free to weigh in from districts on whether or not that makes sense for people. We could put that on that list.
Just as an aside on the special ed note, it might be worthwhile, and I don't know how many people experience this, but we have excess for our students who are in special ed who are in placements outside of our school buildings but are still aligned to our school. So we might have school A, but there are 20 kids that are either residential placement or they are in group homes or other places that are primarily serving them. And then we have tutors and staff go to that student in that location. But some of those excess expenses are actually reimbursed by the state of Indiana on an ad hoc basis based on the criteria of the placement. So I think we may have to talk about special ed sort of generally serving non-public students, and then how special ed costs that are in excess that are actually reimbursable by the state should be approved, because I don't know if all states have that option, but we have some expenses where the special ed funding that comes from the federal government is insufficient, the state has provided a pool of dollars to support those excess costs. And if that excess cost is offset, are we using a net number for our students who are residential placement? And how do we sort of footnote that this number is a per pupil for special education students who are integrated, and this is the per pupil cost for our students who are sitting outside getting residential care and reimbursement for their services that are rendered by other institutions. And that's sort of nutty, but we have a sixth of our students in IPS are special education designated. It's a fairly substantial number of students.
I think you're right that we're going to have a whole meeting on the special ed thing. Anyway, so I don't know if we probably won't get it through this hour, but maybe that's an asterisk for us to kind of dive in there a little bit more.
Yeah, I noticed that it's just now 11 a.m. at the specific time, and there was a question very early on in Oregon. It was not lost, and that question was specifically with the report that is given on to meet the requirement in December of 2018. Has there been any conversation around fixing errors or opportunity to claim errors later? And that's something that, Katie, I think we should add to the questions when we are in contact with the Department of Ed.
Oh yeah, great question.
Definitely. Yeah.
We will.
And I did respond to Oregon. I think what we've been saying kind of before is that we don't really know what the analysis is going to look like, but that this is a state where the intentionality of the requirement is to design a system that works for your state. So we don't really think that there's going to be a lot of oversight in that way, but we're not sure, and we will ask it. So thanks for raising that again.
Yeah, so to wrap it up, Katie, you want to do the invitation for one-on-ones?
Yes, so you should have received this also in an email from me earlier this week. We have time and are really excited to do some one-on-one technical assistance with you. Very specific questions about your state context that you want to talk through. I've already had a couple of states email and take advantage of this. So if you are interested in just having, a one-on-one call with myself and Marguerite, we can talk through some stuff that's specific for you. So go ahead and shoot me an email if you would like to do that.
And our next meeting is on May 16th. And this will be, we've invited ERS to demonstrate, as we mentioned before, their attribution tool that they're developing, which would allow a district to go through some of their potentially non-coded expenditures and decide, do they want to make a mechanism for deploying them across all schools? So do we want to divide it by staff or per pupil or whatever? And so that tool would be there. It's an optional meeting if this is useful to you. You're welcome to tune in for part of it and leave if you have to, but we made the next few meetings kind of more topic based, and join if you like, and we'll have a conversation with ERS in their demonstration. And so that's where we are. We know we went a little over the hour here. Thank you all for engaging so significantly, and feel free to reach out with any questions anytime. Thanks, everyone. And we should have the webinar and the slides and the responses hopefully posted by tomorrow, if not before the end of the week. And if the webinar on the 16th does not apply to you and you want to do office hours, do send me an email to set that up. Thanks, everybody.